turnover is a ripple effect. If you have high turnover, it causes more turnover because employees see it, they feel it. So nipping that in the bud early, figuring out how to build healthy communities, and your supervisors may not have all the skills they need, but if you invest in coaching at every level of an organization, you can build a community and a culture. Coaching isn't necessarily forever, but for organizations who are struggling, who are smaller, who don't have the benefit, investing in that coaching early on can build the culture of belonging that you need to cut your turnover.
Welcome to What Works, where nonprofit leaders share real stories about what makes impact possible and their organizations thrive. Because really, success has patterns, and often the best kept secrets are found not in the boardroom, but on the field. I'm your host, Marla Moody, a transformational leadership coach, an author, and after 3 decades in the nonprofit sector, I'm really passionate about leaders thriving. And today we're going to talk about a real interesting topic, is the cost of turnover. And it's sometimes the unnamed cost. We know some of it, but do we really know the whole thing? I'm happy to have my guest, Heidi Bailey, founder of Bluebird Coaching and a former HR director and executive assistant. So she has a unique background of spanning both the executive support and HR leadership in such a way that she has a different lens of the skills that are needed to keep good people, to find good people, and how to shape employee performance so that you have longer term retention and higher morale. So I'm real excited to talk with you today, Heidi. And Heidi, come and tell us what works. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Marla. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Good. I've been thinking through some of the conversations we've had. We often think about how to perform better, but oftentimes we forget that piece of how do we help everybody perform better and how do we increase morale. And something that really hit me is some of the percentages that you gave me about what is the cost of turnover and even why do people have it? Why do we see turnover? So first, Heidi, just give us a little bit of who you are and why did you start your company, Bluebird Coaching Company, and from there we'll just start exploring this topic.
Yes. Okay. Well, my career's been in the nonprofit sector. I'm very values driven, love working in impact driven companies, mission driven companies. I started out really in HR. Well, I got there kind of in a topsy-turvy way, but my first leadership roles were in HR. First as a training and recruitment director, where I dealt a lot with the hiring, the onboarding of employees. Then I moved into an HR director role where I did, unfortunately, a lot of the firing and the more discipline processes. Those experiences really gave me, I feel for HR directors. It is a hard job, especially in nonprofits. The turnover rate overall industry is pretty high, but nonprofits suffer so much more turnover than for-profit companies. It's around 19% turnover rate. And the really interesting thing is why in my work I focus on entry-level employees is because turnover for people within their first 18 months of employment, it can be as high as 50%. People, that first 18 months, that first year really is so critical for people to know whether or not they're going to stay or leave, depending on what kind of experience they have at an organization. So as a busy HR director, I got burnt out and I decided to move to a different nonprofit as an executive assistant. It was totally different than anything I'd ever done. And I thought, oh, this will be easy. It's not a leadership role. It'll give me a nice breather. But it brought a whole new set of challenges and gave me a lot more respect for people in those support roles. And what I came to learn too in my time as executive assistant to a CEO is assistants hold a lot of knowledge. And
Yes.
if you empower the assistants and those more entry-level roles at organizations, cross-collaboration across teams improves if those people are talking and if they have the skills to support. And I learned what skills executives are looking for. What are they missing? Those key communication skills, confidence to speak up in meetings when you have ideas. Those are skills that a lot of people in entry-level roles don't have, but they're skills that can be coached. One really interesting, statistic is companies think that it's all about pay to retain people. And so they might redo their compensation structure. Well, pay does matter to people. It certainly does. But what's recent research shows, as far as a 2024 study from iHire, showed that what matters more to people is a sense of belonging. So companies increase their pay rates, they found people were still leaving. And what we know from statistics is that 21% of employees, only 21% feel like they have a strong sense of belonging in their workplace. And those who do feel like they have a strong sense of belonging are 2.2 times more likely to stay long-term at their company and 3 times less likely to be looking for another job. So forming that sense of belonging is such a key piece in reducing turnover.
That's a fascinating statistic. Like, what makes belonging? What are some of those elements of belonging?
Yeah. So I think, of course, a huge one is communication. I once coached someone who she was fairly new at this job and she was really not feeling it. And we talked, and what her main struggle was she was not connecting with her supervisor. And so I asked her what was working. She felt like the supervisor wasn't available to her, wasn't giving her clear instruction, wasn't giving her the support she needed. I said, okay, well, I'm not coaching the supervisor, and we're coaching you. So what can we do to fix this? I asked her to give me specific examples of conversations they were having, and it just became very evident that they had very different styles of communication. The client I was working with spoke with feeling, with emotion. That was what drove a lot of her communication. She needed more time. She expected more one-on-one conversation and connection, and that was how she communicated. The supervisor, on the other hand, was more pragmatic in how she spoke. She was very logic, very in and out, very concise. Now, there's nothing wrong with either communication style. They're just different, and it caused a lot of friction. I worked together with this client one-on-one. We talked through kind of some perspective shifting too. Like, are we making up a story behind what they said? Or what if we take just what they say at face value? How do we think we can bridge the gap? We did some role playing and thought about some active listening questions so you can understand really what your supervisor is saying, why, and then figure out what are the right questions to ask someone who communicates that way. How can I ask them the right questions to get the support I needed? And it didn't happen overnight, but with practice, she was able to communicate more with her supervisor and get the information she was needing from her and get the support. It wasn't perfect because really you need coaching on both sides and mentorship for it to be absolutely perfect. But it did go a long way to helping, and she was no longer looking to quit. So she was able to stay at the organization a lot longer because that communication piece. That communication has a sense of belonging. If you feel like your supervisor is not available to you, you feel like they don't value you. And that is a huge, huge piece of it. Other piece of it comes with supervisor expectations. I remember when I worked in hiring, I had this one supervisor who was always in my office complaining about the candidates I was moving forward for an interview, saying they weren't high caliber enough. She wanted people who had an MSW. She wanted people with all these years of experience. The reality, though, is that we were willing to pay that person $17 an hour in the Bay Area.
Right.
And, so we had to do a little bit of tempering expectations. If you are paying an entry-level rate, you're going to get entry-level skills. So that's okay, but we have to think about, well, what are we actually looking for? What I would look for in that position is someone who is teachable, who has an eagerness to learn, who displays adaptability. Those are the types of skills and qualities to look for in an entry-level person. Because what happens is if you hire someone and you have all these grand expectations, they don't meet that, the supervisor can build up resentment. And the employee feels that. They can feel that resentment. And then again, you have this disconnect where they're feeling like they don't belong. One more example is my own employment. When I first joined AmeriCorps, right out of college, my first job, working in a nonprofit, I walked in that first day so excited. I walked out ready to quit because I felt stupid. I thought I was not smart or qualified because all day it was a fog of these meetings with so many different acronyms being thrown about, so many different entities and structures, and I didn't know. I felt like I was supposed to know these things already. So instead of asking a billion questions, which is what I should have done, I just nodded along and smiled and hoped that it would come to me. And I went home and furiously Googled like all these things. That's one way to approach it. But it took me a long time to feel like I belonged there because I wasn't speaking the same language as they were. And that can be really alienating as well. So I actually eventually became a training and recruitment director at that same organization. So I didn't quit, but statistics show that many people would have. It took me a long time to feel a sense of belonging there, but I finally did. Eventually, I became the training and recruitment director years later of this organization. And one of the first things I did was implement like an acronym cheat sheet, like an explanation of how these systems works in the onboarding because I didn't want people feeling alienated or like an outsider like I did.
You know, you had to do the job of cracking the code because
Yeah.
every company does have their own code. I come from a company that has billions of acronyms, and there's an awareness. Like even when I bring someone on who is speaks a different language, I'm very aware of the idioms I use and things like that. But we've also have to be aware of all these acronyms that are so natural. Thank you for your tenacity. And then what you did is you didn't just learn it for yourself. You were then able to make it to where other people had more success. It's like
Right.
one thing that just there's a few things that have hit me is one, the importance of onboarding is what I'm
Mhm.
hearing you talk about. And as you think through success, and then we'll talk entry level since that's your
Mhm.
focus. What are some of the most important onboarding aspects to get someone from I've stepped in the door excited to I don't, to not quitting the first day?
Right. Um, I think a lot of it is just making it a welcoming atmosphere for questions, making it clear that it's okay to not have the answers, I think goes a long way. Introducing everybody, like doing some warm introductions, making, don't just show them. I listened to your podcast. You had someone on recently who talked about onboarding. And she shared this story about, like, she didn't even know where the bathroom was for, like, her first week or something, and that really struck me because I know from working at a busy nonprofit, it is so easy for supervisors and HR managers. They have so much going on. There's so many things to do, and so they don't take the time to get to really know their employee and what their needs are and make them feel welcome that first day. That goes a long way. Just introducing yourself, getting to know them, making it clear to them. It's okay if you have questions. We speak a different language. We don't always know. Slow us down. Ask us. Asking them what their goals are, I think is a big one too. Like, and what do they value? What's important to them? I think those are not just work related, but in general, like what do you value? Getting to know those things will go a long way to knowing how to coach that person, how to supervise that person, and how to make them feel like they belong and less like an outsider.
I think that's really important. I believe knowing your personal values and understanding the values of an organization and then seeing the unspoken values, right? Like
Mhm.
the expectations of overworking, that might be a
Right.
value, but they're not going to write it on their strategic plan. I
Right.
like that idea though of understanding the employees' values too. I was thinking on my last team, the last person I onboarded, there was a guy on my team who took him under his wing. And so I still worked with him to get him up to speed on
Mhm.
some things, but there was someone willing to do that. For me, that just happened naturally because I had someone that just was so good at that and he'd been there forever. So it doesn't always have to be the leader that does it, but it does need to be
Right.
someone.
It's about
Yeah.
fostering a culture of that, of welcoming and
Yeah.
belonging.
And I was thinking about that concept of resentment and how when you're a leader and you're understaffed, you're doing all the work or you're doing a lot of it. You bring
Mhm.
someone on and they're a liability. And I'm talking from a leadership perspective.
Sure.
They feel like a liability until you see outcome from them. So that's a
Mhm.
very leadership way sometimes of maybe not a good leadership way, and that will build resentment, right? Because now not only am I doing your work, but now I have to train you too. What would you say to a leader that might internally feel that?
I would ask them to remember their first job. their entry level roles, ask them if they have the skills that they have now, if they even have the skills that they're expecting this person to have. I think be mindful of that. I also think be mindful of, we talked about, when we talked about turnover, that's one of the big hidden costs of turnover is having to train a new person and having that take away the time. It's a loss in productivity from your other staff because they're trying to cover and train up this new person. Investing in this person, giving them the time that's needed, making them feel a sense of belonging, quieting that resentment, that might make them stay longer. And then you're not going to be in this boat again, trying to train a new person, feeling understaffed. Like staffing shortages are a real issue. And I've felt that so much in my career. Taking the time to develop somebody as in their own leadership in the organization, that's going to take so much of the weight off of you. And yeah, it is a trust game. You do have to learn to let a little bit go and trust a little bit that this person was hired for a reason. Obviously, it's a learning curve. They're going to make mistakes. And as a leader, I think it's your role to anticipate that mistakes might happen and think about what you can do to mitigate those mistakes. What type of coaching does this person need? What kind of support do they need? And how am I going to respond when they do make a mistake? That's another big one too, is your response and how you react. Do you react with outrage and criticism, or do you react with, well, look, here are the real consequences of what happened, but here's where I see opportunities to coach you up so that we don't come in this situation again. Let me take the time to develop you in this area.
Yeah, I think it's crazy when someone makes a mistake and the first thing is like, oh, they're going to get fired. I'm like, that was a really expensive lesson. Why fire them on top of it? Like, I one time, when I was a tech person, destroyed 27 terabytes of information.
Ooh.
We had interns working 24/7 for weeks, and I hit one wrong button. Would I have gotten fired for that? What would the consequences be of that? The 27 terabytes are already gone. And I guarantee you I never did that again. And how I taught people. So instead of that concept of, oh, I'm going to fire, how can we learn from this? How can we do a postmortem? Which I hate that terminology, but how do we do a postmortem to say, what do we learn from this? And what
Right.
won't we do again? And so instead of it being a detriment to someone's job, it can actually be an asset to someone's job.
100%. And, just you talk about the cost of the mistake. Think about how much it costs to hire somebody and to fire somebody. The cost of turnover, just the hard cost, you're looking at sometimes up to half of somebody's salary is how much it costs to replace somebody.
Yeah, I'd like to get into that because you have the financial costs and then
Hmm.
and then a lot of other residual costs. And so I'd really
Yeah.
like to break that down. Let's start with financial costs now because you mentioned two things, the cost of firing someone and the cost of hiring someone. So let's talk with
Hmm.
financial costs first and then we'll get into some of those other residual costs.
Yeah, sure. So, just looking at fire someone, obviously, depending on how long they've been there, they may have a lot of like vacations stored up that you have to pay out. Are they going to be filing for unemployment? There's a lot of just those simple costs. Are you going to have to bring in a contractor or someone temporarily to do the work while you look for a new employee? That is expensive. Then searching for a new employee, I remember being shocked at how expensive it is to post job ads. The cost of just posting an ad online is expensive. The cost of the recruitment software that you use to sort the resumes is expensive. All of the time that people are putting into this, your hiring manager's time, your supervisor's time to interview, all of that, the time is money for folks. So the cost of, and then onboarding, training, background checks, all the things you need to do, that really adds up. It is quite costly to lose an employee and then try to replace them. Just financial costs are huge.
And then let's talk about some residual costs in light of morale or knowledge loss. Some of those things that when you're doing it, especially in the heat of the moment, and like, I need to get rid of this person, what we're not considering.
Yeah. Well, this could go in so many ways. Well, one of the big ones, and I think the obvious ones, is the damage to morale. Especially companies who have a high turnover rate. Eventually, that starts to make employees who are there feel like maybe this isn't the most stable place to work. Maybe I need to be looking for another job. Maybe my job's not that safe. There was actually a recent data came out, the workforce report by Greenhouse. It was like saying that 7 out of 10 employees are actually admit to looking for other jobs while on the clock. Crazy high number. But that's a common thing. If people are seeing, oh, well, they're rotating through people, like, am I next? That's a really good way to get them to think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be put so much effort into this job. Maybe I should be putting some effort into looking for a different one. So the cause of loss of morale, also, if those coworkers were friends or they had a good working relationship, seeing their buddy go. We talked earlier about like the trust issue of bringing on a new person and then they're having to train that new person up. The morale issue is huge, and that can cause even higher turnover and less healthy companies, less healthy organizations. So yeah, the morale is huge. The productivity loss can be huge because you're spending so much time and effort doing interviewing, doing hiring, doing onboarding, doing training, trying to cover the workload that was missed. You talked about knowledge loss. That's a big one. What did the employee take with them? Do you have like really good standard operating procedures in place in your organization? Because I've definitely worked places where somebody was let go, laid off, or terminated with cause, whichever the situation. And it turns out they were the only person who knew how to run Salesforce, or they were the only person who knew how to do some other system that needed to be done even for compliance, major systems, and they were gone like that. And we lost all that information. What did we have to do? We had to hire contractors, which are expensive, to try to figure out the thing. We had to spend a lot of employee time trying to backlog, and the employees are left wondering, why am I doing this? Like, didn't anybody else have this information? This seems like maybe they shouldn't have gotten rid of this person. Loss of trust in leadership. That's a big one.
That's really important to hear. There's a lot of different things I want to highlight. One is you mentioned employees could be looking for other jobs while on the clock. So that's another level of loss of productivity, not only morale, but like, okay, for that hour or two that they're spending looking for a job, they actually should be spending doing the work we
Right.
hired them for. That's something I hadn't thought about, but important. I kind of want to flip the script a little bit, where there are times when you do need to either shift an employee to a different position, or we really do need to get rid of them for different reasons.
Yeah.
I had a person on my team. I tried and tried and tried, and I just couldn't make him work.
Yeah.
And like, and he thought he was doing really well, but so I had to learn how to have those conversations to let him know that he wasn't even meeting his standards. But we shifted him to a different team where he was able to flourish. So let's talk about that piece where there really is a high cost of turnover. And if we do it right, then we're onboarding them right. We're giving them support. We're giving them expectations, understanding values. But what happens when it's just not a good fit?
Sometimes that happens. Sometimes an employee just cannot perform. And I will tell you, Marla, it's a little embarrassing, but the first time I ever had to fire someone, I cried. Luckily, not during the process, but afterwards I went home. It felt terrible to have to tell someone that there's no job anymore for them. And, it's not personal. I had this person on a performance improvement plan. We were working really closely together, and he just wasn't meeting the standard. I will say one thing I am really proud of, though, is that he did reach out to me later and tell me that he thought I was a really good supervisor. And that was, I'd say, one of my biggest accomplishments, because even though I wasn't able to get him to where he needed to be, there was a level of trust built there and accountability built there that he appreciated, which meant a lot to me. And I sometimes look back and think, because this was early on in my career, that this happened, my first fire happened. And I sometimes wonder if I had the skills and knowledge that I have now, if I would have been able to get him there, which is why I think coaching is so important for staff people. Because I think sometimes internally, you don't have the time, you don't have the resources to provide the level of support that person needs. Sometimes coaching can actually save you a lot of money. Yeah, to answer your question, sometimes you do have to terminate, and that is hard. And I think how you communicate that to the rest of your team when someone leaves, how you handle the communication of that transition, being mindful and speaking with other team members who might be impacted and saying, okay, so what do you need? What does this look like for you? Are you worried about for your jobs and your day-to-day tasks and your productivity? bringing them along the board and seeing like, okay, well, we're going to welcome a new member into our team. What do you think might be good skills to have on that team? I think anytime someone leaves, because sometimes you do have to fire people or do layoffs or whatever it is, but sometimes it is time for them to go. How you communicate that with those people who are impacted makes a big difference.
Yeah, well said. I like what you're saying is you can't always share everything and you shouldn't, right? Of
No.
why that person might have left. And that's the hard piece, I think, sometimes of leadership is to care for someone so well and still have a transition.
It's natural for people to be curious. Like, people always want to know, well, what happened? And, as a leader, it's your job to protect that privacy. And,
Yeah,
yeah.
but and also care for the person of just like, let's
Mhm.
have a discussion. I'll share what I can, and I wanna honor the, person of not sharing what's inappropriate to share,
Mhm.
and spending a little bit of time doing that probably goes a long way to build trust, decrease insecurity, just a lot of
Mhm.
those things that are those, unspoken costs of turnover. It's probably easy to not do that. And there's probably a lot of employees that will be aggressive towards the leader because their friend's gone, right?
Oh, that
So,
happens all the time. Yeah. And that's a tough situation to navigate. You can't be totally transparent. You can't tell them all the things, but what you can tell them is, I know this is hard. Knowledge that it's hard, that is a big first step. This is a hard transition and it's going to be a little hard, but we're going to work together. I value your role on this team and what you're doing. I know this is going to impact you, so let's try to figure out how can I minimize that impact for you. And having those are conversations you absolutely can and should have with your team.
thank you. I know I wanna talk about one thing that we are probably a little biased with since we're both coaches, but an external coach and the value of that. I always required every one of my team members to be coached externally because there's value of it. What do you see, especially from an executive assistant perspective, seeing such a broad scope of people being developed? And then as an HR person, what did you see the cost of bringing in an external coach versus the benefits?
Yeah. Well, as a former HR director, I hate to admit this, but most people don't trust HR. A lot of people don't have, you don't, for one, you don't work with the HR person closely on a regular basis. You don't have that relationship built, oftentimes, in larger companies, especially. And also, we talked about entry level staff specifically, and mid level staff often don't have the confidence built up to know what questions to ask, what to say. They might be a little more timid and feel more insecure, especially if you're a company that has high turnover, because as we talked about, that leads to people feeling insecure in their jobs. So I would say the number one benefit to having an external coach is vulnerability. Getting people to be vulnerable and open up to you on what their real issues and concerns are, and figuring out how to understand not what they're saying, but why they are saying it. That is tricky to get people to open up to that for someone who's their supervisor or someone else in leadership or HR, because they're going to be worried about retaliation. They're going to say, well, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to be labeled as difficult? Am I going to be the one who all the supervisors say is difficult to manage because I'm raising an issue? That is a big one. What an external coach can do is kind of get to the root of what that issue is, provide some coaching, and provide information to the supervisors and leadership as needed. They really can go a long way in bridging that gap between supervisor and the employee and helping the employee communicate their needs in a way that is productive and healthy and will lead to collaboration rather than retaliation. Just building that trust is hard. It's hard for supervisors and HR, even if you have a good relationship, employees at the bottom, like at the end of the day, they're going to be worried about their job. They're going to say, what am I saying is going to impact my job? So having an external coach can help someone get so much more vulnerable. They can really get into, well, what are your core values? How does that relate to your work? How can you find that connection so you feel empowered and fulfilled by your job? Because let's face it, not all jobs are glamorous. Sometimes people don't feel super connected to, even if you work at a mission-driven organization, yeah, you may like the mission, but you may not feel super connected to it. You may not see how your job specifically relates, how you are making a difference. And that's something I know I've felt before in my work. Being able to explore, well, what are my values? What is important to me? And trying to work with a coach to understand how that relates to your job, that also helps build a sense of belonging, to our point that we were talking about earlier, is feeling connected and like you are part of the mission. Even if your job isn't a direct line, you're not directly supporting people in your community. What you are doing, it is supporting who you are and your core values and supporting the values of the organization. I think having those conversations, it's really hard for a supervisor to do that. But it's something that a coach can definitely do, and people are much more willing to open up to someone who they know, well, me talking to this person is not going to impact my job. This person doesn't say whether I have a job or not. This person doesn't write the policies for the company. This person has no skin in the game, really. So having those conversations is tons. So vulnerability is a huge one. The other part is just realistics. Yeah, you can coach internally, but are you? Are you going to? Do you have the time? Because I know when I was an HR director, I would have all these grand intentions. I have this great idea for a new professional development program I'm going to implement. I'm going to spend like the whole morning working on it. You sit down, you open up your computer, and like before you even log in, a supervisor's in your office complaining about some performance issue they're having with a staff. Another person called in sick, or then you have another no-show. The union rep is calling saying you have, I don't know if you've ever worked with unions before, but that's a whole other beast. Before you know it, your day is filled up with these unexpected meetings, these unexpected challenges, another, performance improvement plan you have to write, or some issue with benefits that's happening with your vendor for your benefits. Like your day fills up, and the reality is that no matter how many good ideas you have for your professional development coaching, finding the time to do it, I know is a challenge, especially in nonprofits when you are running on a lean budget, usually running on a lean staff. So how realistic is it really for you to provide the type of in-depth coaching you need? So it's really two issues. To me, I think we already talked about how coaching could definitely cut turnover because it does help foster that sense of belonging. It helps bridge gaps between supervisors and their lower level employees. And I do focus on entry level and mid level employees for my coaching, particularly because I think that is an often overlooked area for coaching. I think a lot of organizations invest in leadership coaching, which is fantastic, but I really think you need coaching at every level of the organization in order for it to be cohesive and work. It goes a long way to cutting recruiting costs, cutting turnover to hire an external coach, because what you're paying the coach is nominal compared to what you're paying to replace an employee. If you have an
Absolutely.
employee who is on their way out, the cost of hiring a coach to work with that employee one-on-one is nothing compared to the hard costs of turnover that we talked about.
Yeah. No, and I like that. And, because then, like, I can't afford it and I don't have the time. And what you're saying so well is you can't not afford it. The time and the money spent on quality coaching is going to far outweigh the liabilities. It's up to us as coaches to be the best coach we can be. Like you and I both, we have nonprofit experience, significant nonprofit experience. And we can come from a business mindset or from that nonprofit mindset, but the cost of turnover versus the cost of developing is so significant difference. And so I even before I was a coach, I was an advocate of coaching, external coaching, and especially as a leader, I have hard conversations with my team. I build trust, but there's something about having that external coach where there can be that vulnerability. I'm going to ask you a question that, full disclosure, it's a pet peeve of mine. Oftentimes in companies, the HR department is the same department as the LD department. So
Mm,
leadership development
yep.
and HR are the same people, which means the person who is wanting to develop people are the same people who have to fire people. Uh, I see that as a conflict of interest.
Oh,
And
100%. But it's the reality.
yeah, and it's like, what could it be like if I know, and like, people don't like to do HR, very few people do, and everybody loves to do leadership development. So there's a contrast there. But if I'm going to you as an employee that just has a problem and going to talk to my leadership development person. And as I talk, you pull back and you suddenly put on this HR hat because you're like, wow, she's this or she's that. And suddenly it went from helping me develop to let's put her on a standard performance. I'd love for you to speak into that. I tipped my hat of what I believe, but I'd love to hear it from your perspective.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is a tightrope that you're walking as an HR executive, because I think especially for nonprofits, they don't have it in the budget to have their own leadership development team. It is one and the same person, and that I've definitely filled that role, and I have felt that in my role when people are in my office talking to me, and in my head, my first thought is, how can I support this person? What do they need? What options are available to them? But in my head, I'm also thinking, how am I going to communicate this to their supervisor? Because it is going to impact their work. And how am I going to bring the supervisor on board to not have a reaction of, this is a performance issue? And how am I going to bring them on board that this is just a support issue and a development issue? So it is a really fine line to walk. And I like to think I walked it well, but I'm sure I made plenty of mistakes doing it too. That's the point of HR, is for a lot of organizations, is you are trying to be the bridge between the employer and the employee. You have to protect the company's interests while also advocating for the employees. And I think in the best realm, that's what HR is. But I do think that in a lot of places, HR does take on just the role of protecting the company. That's their number one. That's what they feel pressured to do. And so it can be a big conflict of interest. I hope that HR professionals, one, lean on coaching to do the professional development, because like for all the reasons we talked about, the professional development's needed. But you just brought up a really great point of why HR is not the right person to do it a lot of the time, because they are thinking about the company's interests. They are thinking about this employee's past performance. They are thinking about the supervisor and the team dynamics, and their focus isn't solely on the employee, where a coach can really focus in. Yes, they of course are there to serve the company as well. Like my whole goal in Bluebird Coaching is to help people cut turnover and reduce recruiting costs and build healthy teams. I'm there for the company, but my coaching is focused on this individual and helping them be able to become the leader that I know they can be in order to help the company achieve those goals. So yeah, I don't have a perfect answer for you. It is a
Yeah, no,
tightrope that people walk. And
yeah.
I think until, I also have worked in development in nonprofits, and getting general operating funded is difficult. And
It's not
so,
sexy, so it's hard to
yeah,
get funding for.
yeah, it's not sexy. It's hard to write those grants.
And any donor out there funding the heart and lungs of an organization, operations, HR, the coaching piece, those things far exceed what's done on the field. We multiply the
Yes.
effectiveness of what goes on in the field if we're taken care of. Just like we were talking about, if people are concerned about getting paid, if people are concerned
Mhm.
about are they at risk, we're not getting to our goal. We're not getting to whatever reason that we
No.
belong as an organization. I just have such a passion for operations, which is a similar in some ways to HR, where
Yeah.
it's the heart and lungs of the organization. But wow, a healthy heart, healthy lungs are what make a healthy organization.
Yeah, for sure. And it's does do such a number on morale too, just to run lean. I'll just put that out there too, because people have brilliant ideas at all level of organizations, and there are so many opportunities for impact. And in leadership, I've seen so many proposals for different programs and projects that can really move the needle in our mission and our drive. But we don't always have the resources to fund those or the staff time to do it. And that can also be a big cause of morale. And going back to your original point, I just wanted to say again, turnover is a ripple effect. If you have high turnover, it causes more turnover because employees see it, they feel it, and it's just an ongoing battle. And so nipping that in the bud early, figuring out how to build healthy communities, and your supervisors may not have all the skills they need, but if you invest in coaching at every level of an organization, you can build a community and a culture where the leaders themselves are able to provide that coaching and mentoring to your teams. Coaching isn't necessarily forever. It can be, and I think there's got great benefit to it. But for organizations who are struggling, who are smaller, who don't have the benefit, investing in that coaching early on can really build the culture of belonging that you need to cut your turnover.
Very well said. I think we'll end there. Heidi, thank you. I love your background and your knowledge set and also your heart for making things better. And I'm sure
Thank
if you're an
you.
HR person out there watching, she would probably love to give you some thoughts as well. So
Yes,
thank you for
please
the
reach out
work.
to me.
Yeah. Any last things before we close up?
Just take care of your people and they'll take care of you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for watching what works. Until next time, keep leading with courage, with compassion, and take care of yourself. All right. Thank you, everyone.